We are looking at success, and this is a hard thing to get your head around, but it's like a globe like Earth, and you keep zooming out or looking at different parts of Earth. We've looked at financial, we've looked at professional, we've looked at personal success. What kind of character do you have? Are you living up to your own standards of what it means to be a successful person? Well, the fourth and final one, probably the most important one for me, that if you zoom all the way out, even if you're a good person, what are you? Welcome to the Real Estate and Financial Independence Podcast. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. Whether you're a brand new listener or a longtime listener, it's always an honor to have you back for another episode. The title of today's episode is Are You Successful? How to Measure What Matters. Now, the origin or the backstory of this episode is, as many of you know, I've been writing a book. So if you've been on my newsletter list, every week I've been sharing little snippets from the book. The book is called The Small and Mighty Investor. I'm writing it through the end of this year in 2022 and hope to publish it with bigger pockets in the fall of 2023. But again, back to the origin story of this episode is in the first part of the book, I talk about the 7 rules of a small and mighty investor. And I try to lay out what it means to be an investor who doesn't have to be huge and go big and dominate the entire world and have thousands of units in order to be a, quote, successful investor. And rule number 7 of the small and mighty investor is about defining your own success. And that's what I want to talk to you about in this episode, because a big part of real estate investing is, I want to use a metaphor here, is it's like you're playing a game or a sport. Now, I love sports. Many of you know I play a lot of pickup basketball. I used to play football. That's how I paid my way through college at Clemson University. And sports are a great metaphor for a few reasons. If you think about real estate investing, you think about the financial game you're playing, you have referees, you have rules, there's laws you have to apply, you have to pay your taxes, there's regulations you have to follow. That's kind of like the referee, but you also have this definition of success. So when you play basketball, winning the game is scoring the most points, and winning a championship, you go through a tournament and you beat all the other teams, and if you win that tournament, you win the game. Football has a different way of looking at it. Soccer is a different way. And every sport has their own definition of what a successful team is. Different ways to measure points, different ways to win championships. Well, real estate investing is kind of similar to that. And your finances are similar in that many of us step into games, sports, that other people have already defined what success means. And what I'd like to challenge you to do, and this is what I think is the epitome of a small and mighty investor, and the benefit of being a small and mighty investor is that you can, of course, you got to play by the rules. You got the laws and the regulations you have to follow. So there's still referees, but ultimately you get to define what it means to win as a real estate investor. You get to define what it means to be successful. And the problem, if you don't do that, if you step into somebody else's game, and this is really easy to do, I found myself doing this as well. You step into the social media platforms and you look on Instagram and you say, hey, so-and-so is playing the game of real estate investing really, really well. They have hundreds of units, or they've bought 10 units this year. They are, quote, successful because what we see of them is we think they're doing a good job and they're successful. And then we judge our own progress or lack of progress or our own lives, our own identity by comparison to what we see from other people. So what I'd like to do today, this is a super important topic. It's not teaching you how to own or finance something or buy a property or negotiate or run the numbers, but it's really the foundation of all of that is you defining what it means to win your small and mighty investor real estate game. And I'm going to give you some tips and some personal just stories and ideas from my own life. Not that these are the only way to measure success, but hopefully by sharing some of my ideas of what success means, you can then create your own success. Feel free to borrow some of mine as well, and then have a more clear, focused idea of where you're trying to go as a real estate investor and also as a person. So we want to stay with this idea of you defining what success means for yourself. You're playing a sport, you define what it means to win the game, or to use the slogan from Coach Carson, you define what matters to you. But the first thing we need to talk about here is that more than likely, if you're like me, you have multiple things that you want to be successful at. And it's kind of like if you were looking at the earth, the entire globe, depending on how zoomed in you are or what part of the earth you're looking at, you would have a different frame of reference. So if you're looking at North America, you see North America, but the exact same Earth, you could be looking at from another angle and you get Asia, you get a different part of the globe. And if you zoom way out, you have the entire globe at once. And so it looks different depending on how you look at it. And that's sort of how I see success. And I want to share 4 different frames. Like these are almost like different ways of looking at success, different ways of defining it. And the first way I want to start with, because this is a financial podcast, is how to define financial success. Financial success is something I talk a lot about here on this podcast, on the YouTube channel, and actually defined my philosophy on money and what it means to be successful financially in an old episode at the beginning of the podcast called the Money Life Manifesto. I also have an article that kind of talks about that, and I'll link to that in the video description and the podcast description as well. But let me summarize what I said in that manifesto. The idea for me of being successful financially is kind of balancing these 2 poles of giving money too much importance and not giving money enough importance. And I go back and tell a story about Aristotle, who's an ancient Greek philosopher, and he put together an idea of what it means to have virtue, of have character. And he talked about things like courage. You gotta have courage to be a good person. But he said you don't want to have too much courage, because if you have too much courage, you're going to run and jump off a cliff without a parachute, which is stupid, right? You're being a fool. But if you have too little courage, you're going to be a coward who never faces your challenges, who's always scared of your own shadow. And so somewhere in the middle there, Aristotle called it the golden mean of a virtue. So the golden mean of courage. Well, you can look at money the exact same way. You want to try to find the golden mean of money. At least that's my idea of being successful with your finances. On the one hand, there's people who say, oh, money's not that important. It's the root of all evil, or money's all about capitalism. That's just a bad thing. Well, you know what? If you ignore money and act like it's bad, it's going to be just as important to you, because you still have to earn a living. You still have to pay your bills. You're still going to be dependent on that at some point in your life. So ignoring money and making it unimportant doesn't make sense. But then on the other hand, probably what a lot of us are a little bit more prone to do, myself included, is to give money too much importance, because it's just a tool. If you give the tool when you're building a house too much importance, you are elevating it to the level of the project itself. So money is not the project itself, it's a means to an end. Some of these other ways of defining success that I'm going to talk about. So it's a wonderful tool, money is, but let's just keep it in perspective. If you make it too important, you start getting greedy, you start getting, overbearing, you start working all the time instead of actually enjoying your life and living your life a little bit. So that's the general philosophy for me of financial success. But how do you actually measure that? How do you define that? So for me, it's something called your financial independence number. I have another podcast episode on this, which I'll link to as well. But again, just the summary idea of that is this: a certain amount of wealth such that when you have that much wealth, you don't have to go to work anymore. You can actually live off of your investments. And another kind of closely related concept of your wealth is how much income you can produce. Because if you have enough wealth, you can always turn that into income. You can either sell the asset that you have, the house, the stock, or you can turn it into an income generating asset, which this show is all about. We like real estate, we like rental properties. And so a financial independence number is like a goal you set. It's like the top of the mountain financially. And the way I explain the journey is because it's like a mountain, you can make progress all along the way. So just getting an emergency fund where you have $10,000 in the bank and you have enough money to cover your life if you lost your job. And so you're not going to be destitute for the next 3 months if you lose your job, or 6 months. That is a form of financial independence. That's giving you a little bit more leverage, a little bit more freedom. And then you move up the mountain a little bit, you pay off some of your debt, so you're not so personally having a bunch of money going out the door and you're not susceptible to all those debts. You move up a little bit more, you start buying assets and saving money. And so it's a progression. It is, no matter where you are, you can become a little bit more financially independent, and you can measure how much you're doing and how well you're doing. I have a friend in the financial independence movement. His name is Jim Collins, and he has a term he calls FU money. And what that means is no matter where you are along the path to financial independence, whether you're at the top of the mountain or just right at the beginning, just getting some money in the bank and having a little bit of leverage gives you the ability to say, I don't want to do that. Forget it. Or to be more explicit, FU. I'm not going to do that. I have money in the bank. I have options. I have leverage. I have the ability to have autonomy in my life. And so that's what the tool of money does. Being successful, and the more wealth you have, the more autonomy, the more options you have. And the way you can use that tool is to try to be successful in some other areas of your life. And so I want to talk about what some of those are, at least for me, and how I try to look at that and how I try to measure it. The second area of my life that I try to define success in is professionally. Now, this is very closely related to your finances, but it's a little bit different. Your profession is what you do for a living, perhaps, but it could also be something that's a calling for you, something that you really feel is what you're here on earth to do. And so it can be very practical. It can also be something you work on over your whole life. Like if you're an artist and maybe you don't make a lot of money as an artist or a singer, but that's just who you are. That's the thing you want to do. So they can be closely related or they can be separate things. For me, just to let you know a little bit more about what I see as my professional calling, I've been a real estate investor since I was 22 years old. So that is a profession of mine. And it's something I've tried to be a craftsman at. So this term being a craftsman or a craftswoman is something I got from Cal Newport, an author who wrote a book called So Good They Can't Ignore You. An amazing book that really just changed my mindset about what I'm trying to do professionally. And so what I'm trying to do to be successful professionally is to be the best craftsman I can at my professions. So I'm a real estate investor. I've been doing that since I was 22 years old. I want to be a world-class real estate investor. Not necessarily the biggest real estate investor. I just want to be excellent at what I do. And I always have room to grow in that. As well as I've done in my real estate business, I look at it every day and say, oh, there's things I could do better. I don't do that very well. I don't manage the maintenance very well over here. I need to do that better on that property. And so it's a continual growth game, which is a lot of fun for me because I like growing, but it's also a challenge and something that you can keep pushing yourself to do. So for me, real estate investing is one, but really since real estate investing, I felt more called to be a teacher and a coach. So the reason I'm having this podcast with you, I really enjoy learning and then kind of simplifying and trying to understand what the main concept is and then teaching it to other people. That process for me is just a joy to do. It's a lot of fun. And so being a craftsperson as a teacher and as a coach is also a profession for me. And then also a community advocate, a community volunteer in my local community, try to get involved there and have a nonprofit that has been helping to build trails and alternative transportation networks, so biking and walking around our community. Just something that's been important to me and I'm interested in, how cities are planned and urban planning and walkability. So those are things that are important to me, those three kind of areas of my life. And so how do you define success? It's a little bit fuzzier than financial success, but it actually, especially with your profession that you make money in, precedes you being successful financially. If you're a computer scientist or computer programmer, you being an excellent craftsperson at computer science will definitely lead to more money. So the way I measure success is really practical, is how many hours of deep work have I given to that profession this week? Super simple. Week by week, at least for me, a couple hours a day, I want to be creating something like this podcast episode, like writing my book. So in my teacher coaching profession, I check it off a list. I just have a little 2-hour bubble. I checked that off today. I've been successful today putting that deep work in. With my real estate investing business, the same way. I spend less time on my real estate investing today, but especially in the growth years when I was really trying to kind of get into it and learn it and become better at it, every single day, deep work. Am I doing marketing? Am I doing lead generation? Am I sitting face to face with a seller and negotiating with them? Because that was always the most important thing I could do if I'm trying to acquire properties. How many people have I sat face to face with this week to make an offer to buy their property? Like that is where the rubber meets the road, the most important thing. Anything else I'm doing, I'm kind of wasting time. And so that's the way I measure success on my profession, is actually practicing it and doing it. And so whatever area you're thinking about, both your real estate investing, because you're listening to this, you're probably interested in that. That's either a side hustle or your full-time thing, or whatever other profession you do. You have the thing you do, and then you have like the core skill, the thing that really makes you excellent at that makes you money, perhaps if you're in this to make money. But you need to measure that and say, I want to be excellent at that. I want to practice it. I want to do it on a daily basis. At least that's the approach I take. Nice little simple approach. And at the end of every week, you can look back and say, have I been successful this week? And I'm the one measuring that. Have I been successful at getting better as a real estate investor? Have I been successful at getting better as a teacher or as a community advocate? And the big picture is when you aggregate all those weeks where you hit 5 out of 5 days or 6 out of 6 days where you really dialed in your efforts professionally, the end result is some of those outcomes we want. We want that money as a real estate investor, that wealth, the number of properties. For me, teaching and coaching is having people who are engaged and who like my podcast, and it grows and they share it with other people. As a community advocate, it's actually getting trails on the ground and having a successful project on the ground. whatever is for you, that outcome is the ultimate goal, right? But the process, the thing you do on a week basis, is a more tangible way to measure success. So we've looked at two different ways of defining success. Financial success, we could kind of look at that as the top layer. It's the easiest to measure, but if you peel that back, it's just a tool for more other ways of defining success. And we looked at number two, professional success, really the predecessor of financial success. If you're really good as a real estate investor, you're really excellent at your profession, you can earn more money. But even if you pull that layer back, there's something below that. The third way that I like to define success is who are you as a person? So beyond just your profession, maybe including your profession, but you as a person, you with your relationships, you with your commitments that you make to yourself, how you exercise, how you get up in the morning, what kind of person you are. Are you a kind person? Are you following the virtues that you really think make a good person? Like, are you doing that? And this is one of those interesting successes that it would almost be ridiculous from the outside to measure whether you're a successful person and have a character, because really the only person who knows that is you. You know whether you're living up to the best version of yourself. And there's actually, if you look at the root word of this word character, the word, if you go all the way back to ancient Greek, means something like to chisel. So think about like Michelangelo, the great artist who carved the David, this huge statue of a person out of marble, and just chipped away, chipped away, chipped away. Well, Michelangelo, the legend says, had a vision of this magnificent statue in the rock before he even carved it. When it was just this big raw piece of rock, he could see that David in there. And that's kind of what character is. We have this vision. We learn it either through our religious tradition or through our philosophy or just through our experience, what it means to be a good person. We define that. We maybe borrow it from other people who are wiser than us, but we define that, and we look at that statue, that marble inside the rock, and then every single day, the rest of our life, we chip away at it, we chip away at it, we chip away at it. And that to me is how we try to be a successful person. We chip away at trying to become a little bit closer to the way we want to be ideally. We're never going to reach that because none of us are going to be perfect, but we chip away at it, we chip away at it. That's what it means to have good character. And this is compared to having a good reputation. You know somebody probably who has a great reputation, but then behind closed doors, that person doesn't treat people well. They scream and yell at their employees or something like that. But then behind the camera, they look like this nice, wonderful person. Well, there's a little bit of a disconnect there, right? They're a person who has a reputation of one thing and a character of another. And that's going to catch up with you at some point, right? And so let's go to another idea, kind of help us get our idea around what personal success can mean. And I want to go to a coach who I really admire named John Wooden. He was a basketball coach at UCLA, one of the most successful sports coaches of all times. He won 10 national championships in basketball in a 12-year period. Just unprecedented. Hasn't happened like that since then. Probably won't ever happen again. So he's very successful on the court, but he didn't define success by wins and losses, didn't even define it by how many points you scored. I want to read to you kind of a paraphrase of what John Wooden defined success as. He said, success is, and this is a mouthful, by the way, I'll summarize it. Success is peace of mind, which is the direct result of self-satisfaction, knowing that you did your best to become the best that you are capable of becoming. So number one, it's peace of mind. So success is this internal state, you knowing that you did your best, that you tried to become the best. And this is not only in your profession. Profession is one thing. That's an important part of your life. This is also in how did you get up in the morning? Are you somebody who wants to be somebody who exercises, who eats well? How did you do in that area of your life? Are you someone who wants to have relationships be a priority? Your family, your kids, your wife, your husband, your spouse, your partner, whoever it is. Is that the aspiration you have? Well, how close are you to doing that? Are you chipping away at that idea of being the person you want to be? That is what John Wooden would say. He says, at the end of the day, when you go to sleep, or maybe at the end of your life, when you're on your deathbed, you have peace of mind or you have regret for doing that or not doing that. And I like to look at it on a daily basis because it's just too big to think about the end of your life. But at the end of the day, like, what did you do today? And were you a little bit more successful? Did you chip away at it? And from a practical standpoint, how do you measure this kind of thing? Again, every time you get to the more important levels of success, it's a little bit harder to measure. But I really enjoy a company and an app called Heroic. and I'll put a link to this in the description below. This is actually a new venture, a new business that I've invested in. So I'm a part owner with a lot of thousands of other people as well. But a guy I really admire named Brian Johnson started the company, and he's for years been building these philosophers' notes and teaching about wisdom and historic ancient wisdom and kind of incorporating it into modern life. But it's a really cool app that you use to measure on a daily basis, just through tap, 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 the things that you want to do, like with your energy and your workouts, with your relationships, with your work. And it's just a way to measure and have fun with it, make a game out of trying to have better character and try to live your best life. So if you're interested in that, pretty cool app. That's what I personally do. If you have other ways of doing it, that's great as well. There's plenty of ways to do this, but I would encourage you to think for yourself. This is definitely one of those where you have to define it for yourself. Looking on Instagram and seeing who has the best reputation, maybe not. This is about you defining it for yourself and then measuring it on a day-to-day basis. Are you moving forward towards that best self, or are you moving backwards? So remember the metaphor that we are looking at success, and this is a hard thing to get your head around, but it's like a globe, like Earth, and you keep zooming out or looking at different parts of Earth. We've looked at financial, we've looked at professional, we've looked at personal success. What kind of character do you have? Are you living up to your own standards of what it means to be a successful person? Well, the fourth and final one, probably the most important one for me, that if you zoom all the way out, even if you're a good person, what are you doing to leave a legacy while you've been here on Earth? What are you contributing? What are you giving? And really, it goes hand in hand with number 3. You are a good person. You're being the best you can. You're going and you're becoming a person who runs and has energy and exercises and has good nutrition, who treats people well, who lives up to your virtue so that you can contribute. And this is an idea, like if you heard Steve Jobs, who was the founder of Apple, he described it in his biography, which is a really good, thick book, by the way. He tried to make his own little dent in the universe. Now, we don't have to have like grandiose ideas that we're going to like change the entire world. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But there's definitely this inner satisfaction, this fulfillment, this peace of mind, knowing that you use the gifts you have to contribute to other people. And it might be in a really personal way. It might be in a direct way within your family, which is certainly important for me. But it could be also in a bigger way to contribute to bigger communities, to your local community, to your global community. Whatever it is for you personally, you know that to the extent that you do that, you feel good, you feel fulfilled. To the extent that you don't do that, this is where regret sinks in. This is where at the end of your life, you're like, what did I contribute? Did I really give something to other people in a meaningful way? And to help us think about this, defining this type of success, I want to share a story about a psychologist. He's also a researcher who studied human motivation. He studied why people do what they do. And his name was Edward Dietschy, and the book was called Why We Do What We Do. And the big idea I took away from that book, he said that humans are motivated for multiple reasons, and we are motivated simultaneously from extrinsic motivation, so things external to us. I'll explain what that means in a moment. And then intrinsic, things that are internal to us. And extrinsic motivation, again, not necessarily bad things, but they are things like getting famous, having lots and lots of social media followers, being a celebrity, being wealthy, having a lot of money and having the power and prestige maybe that brings, or being beautiful, being this gorgeous person or this handsome person, and being fashionable. Again, nothing wrong with any of those, and there are definitely a lot of pleasure and good things in having those. But what he found as a psychologist studying people in control studies who primarily or predominantly had those as their definition of being successful, they were less psychologically stable, had less mental health marked by the measures he used than people who were dominated by intrinsic motivation. Now, what does intrinsic motivation mean? Intrinsic motivations are things like I want to grow personally, or I want to contribute to something bigger than myself. And intrinsic motivation also means having deep, strong relationships with other people. Now, again, really hard to measure those from an external standpoint, but to the extent that when they surveyed people and say, are those your priorities versus these extrinsic motivations, they were actually more psychologically stable. But also, if you just look at it from a human standpoint, these people had more meaning, more fulfillment in their life. They were ultimately more deeply happy with what they were doing in their life. And so this to me kind of helps us understand what it means to be successful from a legacy standpoint, from a contribution standpoint. It's not that you need to do anything different, and this is not something I'm perfect at by any means, but it's an orientation on how you're doing things, how you're thinking about things, where you're putting your energy, where you're putting your time. And I think this is very closely related to financial independence. If we just go through life and we earn the money, we save the money, we get all these autonomy, we get these options in life, and we sit on a beach drinking a pina colada. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that or can't do that, but for me personally, I would feel pretty empty sitting on that beach drinking the pina colada for the rest of my life. Maybe for a month to kind of decompress. That's great. We all need that, right? But for the rest of your life, what kind of projects are you doing that are going to make your little dent in the universe, that make a dent in your community, that'll make a dent in the lives of your customers, the people you're trying to contribute to, your family? That's the ultimate question. And that's why we're trying to be a person who's stronger, who has better options, who has more money. We're trying to do that to pass it forward, to make it a better place, to make this earth better, that we've been here. And so this is a big topic. Again, pretty hard to measure, but if you have that definition of success, this is kind of the ultimate zoomed out version. It's something that I still think about a lot. I'm still thinking about what is my life going to be like? What kind of contribution am I going to leave? And ultimately, maybe I don't have control over that. I do the best I can. I leave it all out there. And this is the kind of thing at the end of your life, once you're gone, the people around you, the people who knew you best, they're going to talk about you and say, you know what? That's what that person did. They cared about me. They contributed to my life. They built relationships with me. They took time to be with me. That project they did to make housing more affordable in my community, like they spent a bunch of time on that. What an amazing thing that they did. And whether it's in a tiny way with one person that you're contributing to, or in a larger way, if you happen to be a leader or a project manager who's going to make a big impact on the world, in either case, it really comes down to you defining that for yourself. Is this the game I'm playing, or am I playing something where I'm dominated by extrinsic motivators? Just something to think about. So there you have it. What does it mean to be successful? Well, at least the way I look at it, there's multiple angles, different approaches to defining what it means to be successful. And financial is definitely an important one. It's definitely in the conversation. We talked about that, number one. Number two, professional success. Number three, personal success. Are you aspiring to be as a person, and are you meeting that or getting close to that? And then what kind of legacy are you leaving? What kind of contribution are you making? This is an important topic. This is something, it's not the X's and O's of how to buy a house, how to get financing, but the reason I included it in the book and kind of made it one of the foundational topics of what it means to be a small and mighty investor is I feel like the conversation on success within our community is not wrong, but just incomplete. Not that financial success, or not even that some of those extrinsic motivators aren't something we should aspire to. It's nice to have nice stuff and to take nice trips and to enjoy nice meals and have these satisfactions of life. There's nothing wrong with those. But if that's the only thing we focus on, or if the only thing we focus on with success is how many deals somebody did, or we feel, more importantly, if we look at that and the person who has 100 deals and looks like they have $10 million, we feel inadequate, unsuccessful because we're comparing ourselves to that other person. We don't realize that we're playing a different game. We're all playing a different game. There's no way to measure my success and say I'm even more successful or less successful than that person, especially when you look at it from a different angle like we talked about today. So I hope this thought process has been helpful for you. Hope some of the links I shared with you can be some practical tools that'll be helpful to you as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave some comments. I would love to hear from you, your thoughts on what it means to be successful. If you have any different ways of measuring success, I got to admit, this is something that I don't have figured out. There's always a process, and there's a humility that I am with you. I am trying to figure this thing out for myself, both defining success and also trying to achieve it. It's never something you get to, or any of us are perfect in, but I hope we can have this conversation and kind of elevate the idea that there's multiple ways of looking at success, and we can elevate the small and mighty investor as someone who's a different perspective on what it means to be a successful real estate investor. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, we've got more episodes coming soon. I'm especially getting back into some interviews with other investors, so I'm going to mix in these episodes where I do them solo and have a topic of my own, but I can't wait to get back into some of these live episodes, interviewing other successful small and mighty investors who are successful in their own rights and exploring their story, and that'll be coming over the next couple of weeks, so check those out. Be on the lookout for some new podcast episodes, interviews coming soon. If you like the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my free email newsletter at coachcarson.com/REI Toolkit. In addition to weekly updates, articles, and behind-the-scenes tips from me, my email newsletter subscribers get my real estate investing toolkit, which includes a property closing checklist that I actually use when I buy properties, a real estate deal worksheet, a tenant screening criteria checklist, and other spreadsheets and goodies that will help you on your journey to financial independence using real estate. You can get it all for free at coachcarson.com/REI toolkit. I also want to take this time to thank some people behind the scenes who make this podcast possible each and every week. This includes my podcast editor extraordinaire, Michael Wynn, my amazing virtual assistant, Megan Thompson, my wife, Carrie, who helps me behind the scenes and is my partner here at Coach Carson. And of course, thank you to all of you, the listeners of this show who make everything possible. This show exists for you. It exists because of you. And I really appreciate you being here for another episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I have not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or a legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. See you next time.